Tonight, a manhunt in Alberta tied to 2 murders ends after several tips from the public.
Yeah, definitely concerning that it happens right here.
After hours on edge, how police found the suspect, as the focus of the investigation now shifts to the victims. Pivotal questions emerge after that tragic plane crash in South Korea.
What happened to the systems after the bird strike and how the pilots handled it?
The growing investigation that has some planes grounded. And Jimmy Carter's lasting impression on the world.
He wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker and dedicated to human rights.
The tributes and the plans for the former president's state funeral.
From CBC News, this is The National with Paul Hunter.
Thanks for joining us. Adrian is away. The intense hunt for a double murder suspect in Alberta is now over. The man found dead, Calgary police say, after they warned the public to be on the lookout and stay safe. It comes at the end of what's been a difficult 24 hours in and around the city after police first found 2 people killed in 2 separate locations, then issued a public dangerous person alert for their suspect. Police said they needed that alert both to make sure the public was aware and to get the public's help, and indeed they did. As Madeline Cummings explains, it was those tips that brought the search to an end.
Just a few hours after taking the unusual step of issuing a dangerous person alert, police say they have found the body of the man suspected of killing 2 family members on Sunday night. Responding to reports of a person in medical distress, police found a man in his 70s, dead in northwest Calgary. Later on Sunday evening, in a different neighborhood, officers found the body of his daughter, a woman in her 30s. Neither victim has been identified. News of the killings alarmed Calgary residents, who described the neighborhoods as quiet, calm, and peaceful.
It's scary. It's messed up, so that's not fun to wake up to.
Definitely concerning that it happens right here, just a few houses down.
Police issued the alert just after noon on Monday.
This is an Alberta emergency alert,
urging people to look out for 38-year-old Benedict Kaminsky, who police believed was the woman's spouse. Investigators say Kaminsky wasn't known to police. They warned he could be armed and asked residents to remain vigilant.
So although we still very much believe this was a targeted homicide, we just wanted to alert the public to the concerns that we have for the behaviors of this individual, having committed a double homicide within the last 24 hours, and really we're stronger together as far as utilizing the public to help us in this investigation.
And they did get that help. Police canceled the alert just hours later, saying tips from the public led them to Kaminsky's black Nissan Pathfinder, parked along a road in the Water Valley area, about 65 kilometers northwest of the city. Police found Kaminsky dead near the SUV. Autopsies for the 2 victims are scheduled for Friday, and in the meantime, police say they are supporting the family members who are safe and secure. Madeline Cummings, CBC News, Edmonton.
South Korea says it will conduct safety inspections on all Boeing 737-800 planes flown by the country's airlines as it mourns the deaths of 179 people in Sunday's fiery crash. As Caroline Bargood explains, the search for exactly what went wrong is now ramping up.
A show of respect by South Korea's acting president Monday at a memorial for the 179 people killed in Sunday's tragic Jeju Air crash. It happened as the plane came in for sudden emergency landing after an apparent bird strike, without its front landing gear deployed, and burst into flames. It was allowed to land in the wrong direction, which is how it ended up crashing into a concrete wall. Only 2 people survived. This transportation official says had there been more time, fire trucks would have already been dispatched. Most of the bodies have now been identified, but officials say it could take up to 10 days to return the remains to loved ones because most are not intact. That's adding to the grief for some families, including Park Han-shin. I hope my siblings, my family, can be recovered and returned to us, he says, even if only 80% intact. Questions now turn to what caused the crash and why the front landing gear wasn't down.
What happened to the systems after the bird strike and how the pilots handled it? That's going to be the focus of the investigation. And answers are going to come out relatively soon once the data from the black boxes are downloaded.
Those are now being analyzed, and South Korea says it's launched an investigation into the airline's safety standards and ordered inspections of all 101 Boeing 737-800 planes flown by local airlines. Thousands more are used by airlines all over the world, including in Canada. In a statement, Boeing offered its condolences to the families affected, adding, "We are in contact with Jeju Air regarding Flight 2216 and stand ready to support them." Representatives from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Boeing are expected to arrive in Korea on Monday to take part in the investigation. And as that progresses, the country is now in a week-long period of mourning.
There's so much grief and unanswered questions, right?
That's right. There's so many things we don't know. Like, we don't know the plane's mechanical history. We also don't know why the front landing gear wasn't deployed. Was there issues with it, or was there maybe no time to deploy it? There's also a lot of questions about that concrete wall that the plane crashed into. It houses antennas that help guide planes as they're landing. Now, South Korea's transport ministry says there are structures similar to this at airports all over the world, but it is looking at whether it should have been made from a different material that might break apart more easily.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks.
A South Korean court has issued a warrant allowing police to detain its impeached president.
저는 결코 포기하지 않겠습니다.
Anti-corruption investigators sought the warrant after he refused to respond to questions about his role in this month's botched martial law declaration. He was removed from power less than 2 weeks later. Canada's Transportation Safety Board is investigating whether debris found on a runway in St. John's is at all connected to that emergency landing of a plane in Halifax Saturday night. This video, taken by a passenger, shows the flames as an Air Canada Express flight touched down in Halifax. Air Canada says it suspects there was a landing gear issue. There were no serious injuries. The runway where the plane landed has now reopened. Tributes are continuing to pour in tonight as international leaders share their memories of Jimmy Carter. Since the former U.S. president's death yesterday, flags have been flying at half-mast both in Washington and in cities across the world. And while Carter's time in the White House was consequential, many of the memories being shared are focusing on what he did afterwards and his remarkable character. Sarah Levitt now with more on how Carter's being remembered abroad.
In London, flags fly at half-mast at the Parliament buildings and the Prime Minister's home. Tributes to Jimmy Carter from across the ocean 1 day after his death. Evidence, too, of the former United States president's global influence. King Charles saying of Carter, his dedication and humility served as an inspiration to many. The Australian Prime Minister noting his legacy is best measured in lives changed, saved, and uplifted. And in the United Nations Security Council chambers,
I should like to pay tribute to James Earl or Jimmy Carter.
A moment of silence.
He had a genuine interest in the idea of that making lives better wasn't just an America thing. It was a thing for anybody who wanted to have better schools, better housing, better transport, a better way of life.
Foreign policy was a major focus for Carter both during his term in office and his post-presidential work.
He wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker, largely, and dedicated to human rights.
That true, whether it was decades of conflict in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, China and U.S. relations, or the Middle East in 1978.
It is the greatest diplomatic personal achievement of any president in our time.
It's a peace treaty that has stood the test of time. It's held for nearly half a century. And we believe it holds hope for future generations.
Carter's relentless work was undeniable, eventually leading to a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002, but his efforts still recognized to this day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky commemorating Carter's legacy as he also deals with war. Today, let us remember peace matters, and the world must remain united in standing against those who threaten these values. May his memory be eternal. Here in the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, echoing other leaders, praised Carter for living his values in the service of others to the very end.
And Sarah, we're now learning more about the former president's funeral.
Yes, his funeral will be held on January 9th. That's the day U.S. President Joe Biden announced will be a national day of mourning for Carter. It'll be a state funeral held at Washington National Cathedral, and Biden will be one of the people giving a eulogy.
All right, thank you, Sarah. CBC's Sarah Levitt tonight in London. As America's fight over foreign workers intensifies, Donald Trump appears to be taking sides. Big tech wants the U.S. to let in more highly skilled engineers, but some of Trump's most hardcore supporters are pushing back. And as Katie Nicholson explains, it's pitting Elon Musk against the MAGA right.
Take over, Elon, just take over. The alliance that helped push Donald Trump to victory, now seemingly at war within the MAGA movement over the issue of immigration.
The H-1B visa program is a total and complete scam from its top to the bottom.
Trump's former chief of staff taking aim at H-1B, a special work visa often used by Silicon Valley to hire highly specialized tech engineering talent from abroad.
We have an exciting show for you.
This spat started after the incoming president tapped Indian-American venture capitalist and podcaster Sriram Krishnan to be the White House's AI advisor. Krishnan has advocated for more skilled immigrants to enter the country.
These Einsteins.
That set off far-right immigration voices in Trump world.
American citizens come first.
While Elon Musk posted on X, "The reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H-1B," adding he would go to war on the issue. Bannon hit back, calling Musk a toddler. They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. Trump campaigned on anti-immigration tropes like the disproven rumor Haitian immigrants were eating pets. Yet strategic immigration has traditionally been a GOP norm.
It's actually conservative and Republican Party orthodoxy to support high-skill immigration. We see it, we've always framed it as a way to counter China, to compete with China. You want to attract the best workers.
Donald Trump had previously been critical of the visas, but now he seems to be siding with Musk. He told the New York Post Saturday, "I've been a believer in H-1B. I've used it many times. It's a great program."
A lot of the MAGA folks, they want Trump to come in and just be a hardliner on everything and dogmatic. That doesn't work in Washington.
Republican strategist Chris Ingram says he thinks talk of a civil war in MAGA world is overblown and that Trump can calm the rhetoric down.
If he wanted to change the nature of the debate right now, all he has to do is send out a tweet.
And Paul, for now, it appears that the incoming president is largely letting this dust-up play out on social media.
And Katie, I guess some are already suggesting this could signal complicated times ahead for Donald Trump once he's sworn in next month.
It certainly could, but analysts point out there are always these factions within political parties, some who lean more to the extreme margins. Donald Trump did campaign on hardline anti-immigration messaging, but when he actually gets into office, what he puts into place may have to be more subdued and more strategic, and that will certainly upset some in his camp. Paul?
All right, thanks, Katie. That's Katie Nicholson for us tonight in Washington. Donald Trump has lost his bid to overturn the E. Jean Carroll sexual assault verdict. An appeals court upheld the $5 million judgment against the president-elect for sexually abusing the writer and later defaming her. E. Jean Carroll testified that the assault happened in a New York department store dressing room in 1996. Trump has repeatedly denied that allegation, and his spokesperson says their appeal of this civil case is not over. Ukraine and Russia have completed a major prisoner swap, returning more than 300 fighters back to their countries and families. Wrapped in Ukrainian flags, the prisoners of war wept openly as they raced to greet their loved ones. President Volodymyr Zelensky says 189 of its soldiers were released, some of whom say they were captive for over 2 years. Russia says 150 of its soldiers were freed. Its defense ministry released this video of several of them boarding buses home. A U.S. pet food manufacturer has issued a recall after a house cat died from eating its product. The company says the contaminated batch, which tested positive for bird flu, was also sold in British Columbia. And as Yvette Brend explains, experts are keeping a close eye on the virus's spread.
Days after the death of a house cat has been linked to avian flu, concern is still fresh about that troubling transmission.
Giving a cat a raw food, especially with poultry or beef, any raw food, or undercooked food can be a concern of passing avian influenza to a cat.
That cat was fed Northwest Naturals, an Oregon-based brand of raw food. Its death leading to a recall in several U.S. states and British Columbia, also leading some experts to focus on the bigger picture when it comes to avian flu.
It's only a matter of time before one mutation by chance will be able to be spread from human to human. We don't know when that will be, but certainly the train has already left the station.
The virus has already jumped to humans, dozens in the U.S. In November, a Fraser Valley, BC teen became the first person in Canada to contract H5N1. That teen ended up in critical condition. Health officials have not offered any update on their condition, citing privacy concerns.
But any individual story about this virus gaining the ability to infect other types of animals is going to be a little bit concerning because it's inching us towards the situation where it might become much more common in humans.
When it comes to pets, many vets stress the need to stick to cooked food.
For many, many years, we have been advised against raw diet. There is no significant benefit giving a raw diet to your cat in comparison with the commercial balanced diet.
Avoiding raw meat cuts the risk of infection while preventing further spread or potential mutation. Yvette Brend, CBC News, Vancouver.
The federal government is extending the tax deadline for charitable donations. Now, Canadians can make those donations until the end of February and still claim them on 2024 tax returns. Premiers called for the changes after the Canada Post strike. The service disruption prevented many donors from mailing in their usual holiday checks. Well, rules about flying drones will be changing in Canada next year, and it could have big implications for some parts of the country.
We've seen the technology become more sophisticated. We've seen drones become larger and more capable.
The real difference it could make for some remote communities. Next. Plus, what a year for female athletes in Canada.
Take the shot, save this, score! We tend to not put ourselves in boxes and say you can only look one certain way.
How it's inspiring the next generation of athletes. And later, a father and son get some unexpected visitors.
This was like winning the lottery of whale watching.
Their unforgettable moment caught on camera. We're back in 2. A judge in Argentina has confirmed charges against 5 people in connection to the death of pop star Liam Payne. The former One Direction singer fell to his death from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires in October. 3 people have been charged with manslaughter. 2 others have been charged for supplying the 31-year-old with drugs before his death. Giselle Pelicot's ex-husband will not appeal his 20-year prison sentence handed down after that stunning mass rape trial in France. But 17 of the 50 other men who were also found guilty did file appeals ahead of the deadline. Dominique Pelicot drugged Giselle unconscious and invited dozens of men to rape her for years. His lawyer says he wants to spare his ex-wife a, quote, new ordeal. New drone rules are coming to Canada next year, and with them, a new opportunity for drone deliveries, including life-saving medical supplies. As Georgie Smythe shows, the shift could be a game changer for this country's remote communities.
Drone's going to take off on its own.
Canada's skies are opening up. There's new rules on the way for drone users, making longer, more complex flights easier to do.
We've seen the technology become more sophisticated. We've seen drones become larger and more capable. And there's been a call for more regulations to enable routine operations of what industry would call beyond visual line of sight.
Beyond visual line of sight, that's the term for flights when a drone leaves the pilot's field of view and flies kilometers away to a totally different location, enabling things like large-scale drone deliveries, aerial surveys, and anything that could be done remotely by drone. Until now, it would have taken months to get permission from the regulator for these kinds of flights.
Beyond visual line of sight, that's a whole new realm.
The rules will be most lax in sparsely populated places, meaning Canada's smaller, more remote communities could stand to gain the most as companies seize on this new potential.
So once the command is given to drop the payload, it's an automated process.
Right now we're talking about a lot of data intelligence services where we're collecting data and doing aerial surveillance or mapping or whatever. The next evolution will be where we're using drones for moving middle-mile cargo.
Or even life-saving cargo like medicine could fill gaps in local infrastructure like pharmacies, as this pilot project found out, trialling deliveries to a First Nations community in northern BC.
This technology holds great promise to kind of close, hopefully eliminate the gap in access to medical supplies.
For many in the industry, the future use cases for drones are impossible to fully realise just yet. And don't expect drone-filled skies that soon. While the laws will be published shortly, they won't officially launch till fall. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, 2024 was an exciting year for women in sports on the ice and beyond.
You watch the PWHL, it's a physical sport. It's amazing.
The big strides forward and the excitement about where it could go from here. Plus, where has all the affordable housing gone?
After a financial firm acquires a building, they increase the eviction filing rate by 3. They triple it.
Are big corporate landlords pricing renters out?
They don't care at all.
We'll bring you Adrian's investigation. The National breaks down the stories shaping our world next. Well, it's sure been a big year for women's sports. 2024 saw new professional leagues taking shape in North America and existing ones gaining momentum. Jamie Strachan now on what's behind the surge and why there's still room to grow.
For young Canadian girls, when it comes to sports, there's plenty of examples of what's possible. The PWHL is thriving. At the most recent Olympics, most of Canada's medals were won by female athletes.
I think not just kids, but parents, that their daughters can be successful at this kind of level. And now there's the transition into professional sport.
There is professional soccer. The Toronto Tempo are the WNBA's newest team, and PWHL players are even part of the latest EA Sports NHL game, one of the most popular video games of all time.
You watch the PWHL, it's a physical sport. It's amazing. It doesn't have to be dumbed down to be girls' sport.
McBean was part of a recent summit that looked at girls' participation in sport. A new report from Canadian Women in Sports says 63% of girls 6 to 18 participate in organized sports, higher than ever and only slightly behind boys. And fewer are leaving sport as they age.
For the first time, we're seeing that the dropout rate between girls and boys is actually starting to close and look more comparable, which is a real positive sign of progress.
Canadian basketball star Kia Nurse says young girls are thinking about sports in a different way.
We tend to not put ourselves in boxes and say you can only look one certain way. We try to give ourselves an opportunity to show that you can be your most authentic self, because that's when you're going to play your best.
And experts say much more is possible. All of this has happened without Rogers and MLSC, who own all of Toronto's major league sports teams.
Will, the largest sport property in this country, who essentially hasn't been involved, decide to pick up a playbook and develop a playbook and get active in the women's sports marketplace?
Dreaming of bigger things on the biggest stages and starting to see it pay off in smaller gyms and arenas across the country. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. And tonight, the rise of financialized landlords and Canada's shrinking rental stock. What happens when private equity firms take the keys to affordable units?
What we found was that on average, after a financial firm acquires a building, they increase the eviction filing rate by 3. They triple it.
We just keep asking myself, where we can go? What's that? There's nowhere to go.
In the middle of a housing crisis, big corporations are taking unit after unit, and tenants are suffering. In the fall, Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault spoke with some of those tenants fighting back against corporate landlords and soaring rental prices.
So we don't know who owns Canada?
We don't know who owns Canada.
In the middle of a huge housing crisis, we're investigating the role of big corporations.
We're not tasked with building deeply affordable or social housing. We're in business.
They're sometimes called financialized landlords. So what happens when they're the ones buying up old buildings?
The buildings are still there. They're just no longer affordable.
It was affordable for us, but now we're not affordable anymore.
What's the cost and who pays when giant corporations move in? Not here, not now. Every time these renters protest what they call punishing rent hikes, this is the line they say they hear.
Like carrying on with our conference.
PSP withdraw the above guideline rent increases?
Sorry, I don't do this in line with it, please.
When protests outside their Toronto apartments didn't work, they started showing up at the offices, interrupting board meetings of the companies that own the buildings.
We are tenants of Thorncliffe Park.
The more than 80 residents from 3 Toronto buildings have also now been on a rent strike for over a year. Still, nothing seems to change, and something needs to change.
Our landlord has appealed for big rent hikes that will force people out of their homes.
Halil Alibi is at so many of the protests because he says for him, there's nothing left to lose.
Every time when you go for a grocery, the first thing you think, not about the wallet, you think about the rent.
He searched outside Toronto and still cannot find something he and his family can afford. And he admits sometimes his thoughts are extremely dark.
A lot of homeless living at the park, and some of those huge tents. But honestly, I speak to myself, oh, those people are lucky. They don't have pressure to pay the rent. For us, the rent is a pressure. Those people are lucky. They're living their life, no rent.
Imagine thinking people without homes might be better off. The Canadian reality is rents here have increased 22% in 2 years. Canada now ranks the lowest in terms of affordability of all the G7 countries. But why? Some believe a lot of it has to do with who owns the buildings and what they do with them.
We're losing affordability.
Martine August, with a PhD in planning, has been chasing those facts for years.
We ran the numbers in Toronto and found that in 2020, for example, financial firms bought 90% of all the rental housing units that came up for sale. And so they're really consolidating ownership.
August says in Canada, the biggest financial firms own close to 400,000 suites across the country. That's nearly 20% of the purpose-built multi-family rental units, and she thinks that might be an undercount. So, big firms own rental buildings. So what, you ask? Well, Martine August isn't talking about companies that own and run rentals as their full-time business. She's using the term financialized landlords, firms with investors that buy up housing stock as an investment, large private equity firms, real estate investment trusts. We're talking about Starlight Investments in this story because that is Halil's landlord, but there are many others. And what worries some is that these financialized landlords tend to buy up older buildings with lower rents. We're talking about affordable housing. And then they find ways to make those assets, those buildings, profitable for investors. Martine maintains this is where it gets rough for renters. It just stops being affordable housing. Again, she's done the math.
Financial firms are raising rents higher than other types of landlords, including large chains. And what we found was that on average, after a financial firm acquires a building, they increase the eviction filing rate by 3. They triple it.
Move out old tenants, then raise rents on those now empty units. When she says that's the business model, she's not making an idle comment.
Consider Starlight Investments. It's the largest landlord in Canada and has over 54,000 units. Its own promotional material for investors lays it out, referring to buying buildings with below-market rents at the time, and in one case saw rents increase by $411 per month.
These papers that are in front of you are because this is how the companies describe their business model. And I'm wondering what you see in there. What stands out?
So this shows quite clearly the impacts of this repositioning strategy, this approach to making money for investors that these types of firms use. It's coming at the expense of affordable housing in Canada. And I said this is one building, right? This company has repositioned hundreds of properties in Canada. And so the net effect of that is rents are rising.
Profits come when units are turned over and renovated. For tenants who can afford to move into updated units, they look good. Here's one in a building owned by Starlight Investments. It's the building Halil happens to live in. His apartment looks nothing like that.
Oh yeah, that's all water damage, and they just painted over it.
And they don't care at all. Even like for this, it was broken for a while to open it. It's just, everything is broken. The water comes from this way.
Halil insists older units like his are treated differently than newer ones with much higher paying tenants. His feeling is that the company just wants to push people like him out.
If anything will be broken or damaged in new units, they will do it in proper way, 5 stars, absolutely. But then for us, garbage.
And so you're taking a risk with the rent strike, right?
Yes, because I want better.
Does it make you nervous, though, that you're taking that risk?
No.
Without financialization, you will hardly have any landlords.
We uncover opportunities to deliver superior returns.
Over the months we've been following the story, we repeatedly asked Starlight for an on-camera interview, but the company declined our request. So we reached out to this man, Michael Brooks, the CEO of RealPAC. That's a trade association of real estate investment and development firms, Starlight Investments among them.
You know, you talk to people who live in some of the units in Thorncliffe Park, for example, where you've seen those rent strikes, right?
Yeah.
And they talk about the above guideline increases that they just flat out can't afford, and that the trend line is that the LTB approves them, and they're stuck. What are they supposed to do? Because they will tell you that they see that the common areas have been renovated. That's great. They see new units being renovated. That's great. But their cabinets are falling off the walls, and they've got water damage, and they've got holes, and they can't get anyone in to fix them, and yet they're paying the above guideline increases.
Yeah.
The frustration builds, right?
I personally doubt a lot of those stories from the big landlords. Remember, when you get
I've been in those units. I've seen them, and I've sat with them.
So the big landlords run their apartment buildings with a ticket system. If you've got a complaint, you fill out a ticket. That ticket gets archived in their software system, and then someone gets engaged to fix that. So that's the way it should run.
It's supposed to work.
That's the way it's supposed to run in the larger buildings. The above guideline rent increase approach is adjudicated in Ontario.
That's exactly what Starlight told us in an email. They also said they care about their residents, and since 2019, they've invested more than $28.5 million in capital improvements to these buildings.
90% of the buildings in this province are over 45 years old. If your house was 45 years old, you're on your second roof, your second set of windows, new door, new furnace, new air conditioner. It's the same with apartment buildings. They don't care who owns them, they depreciate. And it takes a lot of money.
Coming up,
housing rights are human rights.
Can government find a fix?
Why not? I mean, it's violating the right to housing.
You want this to be East Germany in the 60s? There you go. Have them nationalize it.
And Halil versus Starlight, the fight continues.
Where we can go? We just keep asking myself, where we can go?
The struggle to find a solution to Canada's housing crisis as equity firms take more control of once affordable rental units.
we're in business. We're not a social agency.
But priced out renters refuse to go quietly. So what's the way out? In part 2 of our investigation into the lack of affordable housing, Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault looks at the government's role as the industry defends its position.
Another building, and this building, and this building, and all the area, it was affordable for us. But now, they're not affordable anymore. For us to leave from here, there is nowhere to go. What can we do?
Halil points to 3 buildings now owned by Starlight Investments, including his own. The money landlords say is needed, tenants like Halil say shouldn't come from them.
100% sure if they will take that easily from us, they will bite again and again and again. They will keep going. That's why we try to make ourselves close and stick together.
Here's another number Martine August wants you to consider, 550,000. She says that's an estimate of the number of affordable housing units in Canada that have simply vanished over the course of a decade. Where'd they go? Well, the units themselves still exist. They're just no longer affordable, have been turned over, are now priced out of reach. So just as Canada brings in more people and talks about building more affordable housing, the reality is units that already exist are slipping out of financial reach.
I think people watching this know exactly how that looks when they go searching for an apartment and can't find anything within their price range. The buildings are still there, they're just no longer affordable. This is a neighborhood in Toronto that has historically provided a lot of affordable housing.
This is Parkdale. It's also where 10 years ago, Martine August began studying the housing crisis.
There started to be a change that I noticed around 2014 when firms started to buy up properties in this neighborhood and start to sort of forcibly gentrify entire apartments. And these were financial firms.
And by gentrify, what do you mean? Because some people will hear that word and think, oh, they're improving them.
We're standing in front of one of the first buildings where this was happening. This building was bought by a firm in 2012. And what they started to do was get units empty. They were doing all sorts of aggressive property management strategies. So turning off the water, turning off the electricity, engaging in really noisy and disruptive construction projects that were kind of driving people crazy, ripping the balconies off, and trying to push people out.
If Martine can pinpoint the change to the 90s, what was happening? Well, it turns out the federal government stopped investing in subsidized housing in 1993. And then, in 1997, Ontario introduced something called vacancy decontrol. It meant once a unit was vacant, landlords could increase the rents however much they wanted. Big incentive to get people out of units.
And absent a regulation to say they can't, I can see a private company saying, listen, it's legal, it's open to us, it makes good business sense for our shareholders. Why not?
You're really underlining why we need more regulation to prevent this kind of thing. Why not? I mean, it's violating the right to housing.
Fight, fight, fight! Housing is a right.
The right to housing. You may have heard that phrase again and again. In 2019, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that housing would be considered a human right in Canada.
Our government recognizes that housing rights are human rights. Everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home.
But what does that actually mean? Michael Brooks say there is no clarity on that at all.
Look, the human right to housing is a government obligation at the federal level. And I've gone back to the UN source documents on this. The position, for example, of the Federal Housing Advocate is that don't make it worse for us by evicting people.
Right.
I get that too. But we're running a business. We might have violent people, we might have people who don't pay rents for a year and challenge us to take them to the Landlord and Tenant Bureau. We may have people damage the units. We need to have eviction as a remedy. But there is zero literature in this country on what's the private sector obligation. We've offered to engage with the Federal Housing Act. Let's define this. What does this mean for us in the private sector? Because we're in business. We're not a social agency. We're not tasked with building deeply affordable or social housing. We can't be there. We're in business. Let's draw a line between these two. You do this, government, we do this. That's it.
So here's where Michael Brooks and Martine August agree. If you want affordable housing, governments have to get involved again. But for Brooks, making it tougher for private industry to invest in Canada's housing market would make the crisis worse. I would imagine the only thing that makes large corporate entities move out of the space is that it's no longer the sort of climate where it makes business sense to be here.
Yeah, but who's going to buy the units then? Who's going to buy these buildings? This is a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. Who's going to write that check? Mm-hmm. And after that, who's coming to this country to build anything with that kind of a, I've called it Marxist, the scent of Marxism. I mean, you want this to be East Germany in the 60s? There you go. Have them nationalize it.
Fundamental philosophical and financial interpretations of the place of housing in this economy, and no solutions on offer that could possibly come quickly enough for the people in crisis right now.
Just to find a cheaper and safe place than here. But for us, where we can go, we just keep asking myself, where we can go? What's that? There's nowhere to go, nowhere at all.
Over a year, that is how long Halil and the other Thorncliffe tenants have been on their rent strike. It cannot go on forever, and he's facing an eviction application now. If someone else sees a way to live affordably in this country, he says, he's ready to try it, to try anything.
Since Adrian's story first aired, tenants have continued to fight back through protests and other means, and we'll keep following this story into the new year. Coming up, a BC father and son get an up-close view of a pod of orcas.
This was like winning the lottery of whale watching.
The chance sighting in our moment. Well, this holiday season, The National is bringing you a countdown of the most popular moments from the last year. We're calling it the 12 Days of the Moment. It's not every day an orca swims into a marina, even in BC, and it's even less common for several. But a father-son duo was there to see it.
We were down working on the boat, and I saw one of the staff at the marina running down the dock. I thought there might be an emergency. I was looking for smoke, and instead I saw spray up in the air and a big black fin.
Just to be so close, you know, and the four of them were going in different directions right in front of me, just kind of swarming. That big one would come by me, he would surface and take a breath, and his dorsal was right next to my face.
I think they're hunting you. I can tell you they're big. I think they weigh more than our boat, and they're just pretty spectacular to admire from a distance and even better up close. We were running back and forth across the breakwater, running alongside them, watching them dive underneath us.
I've been up close a couple of times, but this was like winning the lottery of whale watching.
You know, not to get all corny here, but the news is so often full of gloom and doom. And as I wrap up my little stint filling in for Adrian and Ian, I gotta say, isn't it sometimes amazing to see something so wondrous as that on this planet, in our country? What a note to go out on. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime, on the free CBC News app, and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Paul Hunter. Take care.